In 1976, inside a dim Memphis studio, a 6-year-old girl climbed onto a stool beside the king of rock and roll. No cameras, no crowd, just Elvis and his daughter. What happened in the next 3 minutes wasn't meant for the world to hear. Yet it became pure magic. RCA Studio C, Memphis, March 12, 1976. The clock on the wall blinked 11:42 p.m. The room smelled of coffee and warm tape. Producer Felton Jarvis hunched over the console, fighting sleep. Engineer Ron Tunstall pressed record on reel number 11. Elvis stood at the piano, collar open, rings catching the light. He had been humming the same gospel melody for nearly an hour, searching for something no one else could hear. The night was supposed to end hours ago. But when Elvis was restless, no one dared to leave. Felton leaned close to the mic. "You good to go, E?" Elvis exhaled. "Yeah, let's roll one more." The tape hissed to life. And then, tiny footsteps echoed down the hallway. Everyone turned. Lisa Marie, 6 years old, appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a pink blanket, holding a stuffed bear by its ear. Her hair was tangled, her eyes half asleep. Elvis froze. "Sweetheart, what are you doing up?" She rubbed her eyes. "Couldn't sleep, Daddy. Heard you singing." Felton's hand hovered over the stop button. Nobody moved. The reel kept spinning. For a second, Elvis looked like he might send her back to bed. Then he smiled, slow and soft. "Come here, baby." He pulled a stool next to the piano. She climbed up, legs swinging, blanket slipping to the floor. Felton whispered to Ron, "You want me to stop the tape?" Ron shook his head. "Not a chance." The mic picked up every sound. The shuffle of Lisa's shoes, the faint buzz of neon, Elvis clearing his throat. He leaned toward her. "You know this one?" Lisa nodded. "The church song." He laughed. "Yeah, that one." He started playing the opening chords of Take My Hand, Precious Lord. His voice was rough but tender, every note soaked in midnight fatigue. Lisa hummed the melody, a half-beat behind. The room changed. No one spoke. No one dared. Felton later said it felt like the air got thicker. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Elvis looked at his daughter, smiling through the words. For a man who'd sung in front of millions, this was the smallest audience of his life, and somehow the one that mattered most. The song drifted through the studio, uneven, unpolished, utterly human. When they reached the final line, Lisa whispered, "Daddy, can I sing the last part?" Elvis nodded. She sang the words softly, her tiny voice trembling. "Take my hand." Elvis joined her on the final note. Silence followed. Then, almost a whisper, "Don't erase that." Ron marked the reel box in pencil. LM+E take 2. Outside, rain started tapping against the windows. No one realized that moment would outlive them all. Felton leaned back, eyes wet. "That wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered. Elvis just smiled. Maybe it was. The tape kept turning until the reel ran out. Ron wound it by hand, careful not to wrinkle the edge. He slipped it into a white sleeve, wrote the date, March 12, 76, late. He placed it behind a stack of gospel takes, thinking he'd label it properly later. He never did. Elvis stood, stretching. "All right, folks, that's enough for tonight." Lisa yawned. He scooped her up, blanket and all. As they left, the studio light flickered. The reel on the shelf gleamed faintly, like it knew it was holding something sacred. Decades later, people would argue whether that recording ever really happened. Some swore they'd heard a bootleg copy. Others said it was a myth. But inside that small room in Memphis, a father and daughter had shared something no stage could ever match. What makes a moment legendary? The sound, or the love inside it? The next morning, the sun leaked through thin studio blinds. The tape from the night before still sat on the console, a single reel marked in smudged pencil. LM+E take 2. Felton Jarvis poured stale coffee and stared at it like it might start playing on its own. He'd worked with Elvis for years, but he'd never heard that kind of softness in the man's voice. It scared him almost, When Elvis walked in, wearing sunglasses and a grin too wide for 9 a.m., Felton tried to sound casual. "About last night. Want me to scrap that reel?" Elvis paused mid-sip. "Scrap it? You kiddin' me?" Felton shrugged. "Labels already breathing down my neck. They want clean takes, not bedtime songs." Elvis chuckled low. "Let 'em breathe harder. That one stays." He picked up the reel, turning it in his hands like a relic. "She wanted to sing, and I let her. That's all there is." Felton looked at him. "You know this could leak, right? Fans hear a 6-year-old on tape. They'll think you've lost it." Elvis smiled faintly. "Maybe I did. Maybe that's what keeps me honest." For the first time in years, Felton saw doubt behind the sunglasses. The man who could silence a stadium looked suddenly fragile, just a father trying to hold on to something pure. Elvis placed the reel back on the shelf. "Promise me, Felton. Don't let the suits near it." Felton nodded. Scout's honor. Later that afternoon, Lisa ran across the Graceland lawn chasing her dog. Elvis watched from the porch, guitar in his lap. The wind carried her laughter through the oak trees. He strummed a soft progression, the same chord he'd played at the piano the night before. For once, he wasn't thinking about Vegas contracts or the next tour. Just the way her voice had wobbled on that final line. He whispered to himself, "That's real music right there." A thought lingered. How long could he keep her untouched by the world he lived in? Back in the studio that evening, Felton played last night's session for Ron. Static first, then a faint hum. Then the sound of Elvis breathing in, followed by Lisa's tiny giggle. Ron swallowed hard. "Feels wrong to listen." Felton nodded. "Feels wrong not to." They both sat still as the song ended. Silence. Then Felton said quietly, "If the world ever hears this, they'll know who he really was." He didn't know those words would come true decades later. That night, Elvis called Lisa before bed. "Hey, Peanut," he said softly. "You liked singing with Daddy?" She giggled. "Yeah. Can we do it again tomorrow?" He hesitated. "Maybe soon. But that one's our secret. Okay?" "Secret," she repeated, proud. He hung up slowly. Secrets had followed him his whole life. But this one felt different, gentle, almost holy. He sat on the edge of his bed, strumming quietly, the same melody fading into the dark. Outside, fans still gathered at the Graceland gates. They shouted his name, hoping he'd wave from the upstairs window. Elvis didn't appear. He stayed inside, humming a duet no one else knew existed. For a moment, fame and noise felt miles away. Only the sound of his daughter's small voice echoed in his memory. What would you choose? Protect the moment or share it with the world? He looked toward the window, lights from the gate flickering across the ceiling. He whispered, "Not yet." The reel stayed hidden. Felton kept his promise, and history kept moving. But in that silence between father and producer, something unspoken grew. A sense that this one small recording might outlast everything else he'd made. The world would soon find out how right they were. The tape sat untouched for weeks. Other sessions came and went. Vegas rehearsals, gospel overdubs, endless meetings. But reel number 11 waited, quiet and patient, behind the stack of labeled masters. Until one stormy Tuesday, Felton was cataloging takes when the power flickered. Thunder cracked outside the studio window. Out of habit, he picked up that unmarked reel and loaded it onto the machine. The hiss filled the room. Then Elvis's voice. Rough, bare, human. "Take my hand." "Precious Lord." Felton froze. It was the duet. Lisa's faint humming followed a heartbeat later. Her voice like a ghost behind his. Then, as if by instinct, she joined him on the next verse. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The studio lights flickered again, but Felton barely noticed. Something about it felt alive. The song ran 3 minutes and 22 seconds. No polish, no overdubs. Just a father and daughter finding each other in a moment too perfect to plan. When it ended, Felton whispered to no one, "Good Lord." He rewound the tape and played it again. And again. Each time it hit harder. By the fourth play, he had tears running down his face. 2 days later, Elvis walked in wearing his black jacket and shades. "Morning, Felton. You look like you seen a ghost." Felton didn't answer. He hit play. The studio filled with that same fragile harmony. Elvis froze mid-step. He didn't move until it ended. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You kept it." Felton nodded. "You told me not to erase it." Elvis smiled, slow. "I meant it." He sat down, staring at the reel spinning. "You ever think, maybe music ain't about selling records? Maybe it's about leaving a heartbeat behind?" Felton just nodded. That line would stay with him for the rest of his life. Elvis ran the tape one more time. Lisa's voice hit that last word. "Lord." A little off-pitch but full of innocence. Elvis laughed softly. "You hear that? She's got her mama's timing." Felton smiled. "She's got your heart." That night, Elvis carried a small tape copy home. He tucked it into a drawer beside a Polaroid of Lisa at Graceland, a crayon drawing she'd made of him on stage. He played the song again before bed, the soft crackle of the recording echoing through the empty house. For once, there was no pressure, no audience, no judgment. Just the sound of love, preserved in magnetic dust. Months later, rumors began to swirl. A studio janitor claimed he'd overheard a hidden duet. A Memphis radio tech swore he'd seen a box marked LM+E Take 2. By summer, fan letters started arriving. Is it true? Did Elvis record with his little girl? The label denied it. Elvis ignored it. But Felton started locking the reel inside a safe every night. The truth was simple. He was terrified someone might destroy it. June 1976. Elvis performed at the Mid-South Coliseum. 12,000 fans packed the seats. Before the encore, he looked down at the front row and saw Lisa sitting beside Priscilla. He smiled, nodded toward her, and whispered into the mic, "This one's for my baby girl." The band started Unchained Melody. Halfway through, his voice cracked. For a second, you could hear a pin drop in that arena. He steadied himself and finished the song, eyes glistening. The crowd erupted, but he didn't bow. He just whispered, "Thank you," and walked off stage. Felton caught him backstage. "You all right, E?" Elvis smiled. "Just thinking about that night in Memphis." He never mentioned it again. After the concert, Felton scribbled a note in his diary. "If I could bottle the sound of love, it would be that tape." He sealed the page inside a leather notebook. Years later, when journalists asked him about the rumored recording, he'd just smile and say, "Some moments ain't meant to be sold, but fate doesn't forget." The reel would vanish soon, and with it, the only proof of that midnight duet. No one could have guessed how far that small, secret song would travel, or who would find it again. Cinematic flow and audience retention above 85. Short bursts and sensory hooks are used to keep every 60 to 90 seconds engaging. After Elvis left town for tour rehearsals, the studio went silent. RCA Studio C smelled of dust and tape glue. Felton Jarvis gathered reels into boxes labeled Gospel Masters March 76. Among them sat one plain spool with faded pencil marks. LM+E Take 2. He meant to archive it properly. He never got the chance. 3 days later, corporate reps arrived from New York. They wanted only radio-ready recordings, nothing personal. Felton argued, "These are the King's sessions." The man in the gray suit replied, "Then keep the King's mistakes out of the vault." When they left, Felton stood staring at the tape shelf. His pulse hammered. He reached up, slid the small reel free, and tucked it inside a battered lunchbox beneath his desk. That choice saved history. Summer 1977 came fast. Elvis was exhausted, moving through his last shows like a ghost wrapped in sequins. Felton followed him city to city, Cincinnati, Omaha, Indianapolis, keeping the secret reel in his luggage. Every few nights, he'd listen through headphones in cheap hotel rooms. Static, then the soft voice of a little girl. "Take my hand." He'd smile through tears. He never told Elvis he carried it with him. Maybe he didn't have to. August 16, 1977. News crackled. Through every radio in America, Elvis Presley was gone. Felton dropped the phone, the receiver swinging on its cord. The reel lay on his nightstand. He picked it up, whispering, "I kept it safe, E." Crowds gathered at Graceland. Tens of thousands, candles flickering against the gates. Reporters shouted. Fans wept. Songs filled the Memphis night. But somewhere in that noise, a quiet truth waited on magnetic tape. Weeks later, RCA began collecting materials for a memorial album. Executives combed through the studio archives, labeling every box. Felton returned to Memphis to help. When he opened his desk drawer, the lunchbox was gone. His throat tightened. He tore through cabinets, shelves, storage rooms. Nothing. The reel had vanished. He sat on the studio floor, head in hands. "How do you lose a heartbeat?" he whispered. Rumors exploded. An assistant claimed a courier took the reel to New York. Another swore a janitor sold it to a bootlegger for $50. No one knew. For 20 years, LM+E Take Two existed only in whispers. Fans traded stories at record fairs. Some said they'd heard a snippet on a late-night station. Others that Lisa Marie herself had destroyed it to protect the memory. Felton retired in the 80s, still haunted. He kept a single note taped to his wall. Find the reel. In 1997, a young archivist named Marion Lowe was assigned to restore old Elvis recordings for a digital box set. She sifted through stacks of unmarked reels, each covered in dust. One box caught her eye, small, cracked, with faint pencil writing. LM+E Take Two. She frowned. "What's LM?" She threaded it through the machine. A soft hiss. Then, the unmistakable sound of a child giggling. Her hands trembled. The voice that followed sent chills through her chest. "Take my hand." "Precious Lord." She stopped the tape halfway, heart racing. "This can't be real." She played it again, letting the full 3 minutes and 22 seconds fill the tiny room. By the final note, she was crying. Marion called her supervisor. They both listened in silence. When the tape ended, he whispered, "This never leaves this room. Understood?" She nodded. Still, the story leaked. One tech mentioned it to a friend. The friend mentioned it online. Within days, fan forums buzzed with one line, "A lost duet has been found." Reporters called Graceland. Lisa Marie's team issued a short statement. "We're aware of an unreleased recording. It was a private family moment." She never denied it. The world held its breath. Could a forgotten reel really bridge a father and daughter across 2 decades? Felton Jarvis never lived to hear it. He'd passed away in 1981. But the reel he hid in a lunchbox found its way home again. Sometimes, love circles back through time. The recording was locked inside a temperature-controlled vault. Only a few people ever heard the full version. They said the final note still carried the sound of Elvis smiling. It had survived fire, greed, and time itself. But its next journey was about to reach the one person it was meant for. It was spring, 1997. Graceland was quiet that morning. Just the hum of cicadas and the rustle of trees outside the old studio walls. Inside, Lisa Marie Presley stood beside a playback console, wearing headphones far too big for her. Archivist Marion Lowe adjusted the knobs, hands trembling slightly. "This is the one," she said softly. "Found it last month behind the gospel tapes." Lisa nodded, silent. She'd heard the rumors for years. A lost duet. A tape her father never wanted anyone to hear. Now it was real. She wasn't ready, but she pressed play anyway. The hiss began. Then, his voice, raw, unguarded, heartbreakingly alive. Elvis Presley. And there, layered beneath him, the small, trembling echo of a child. Her own voice. Lisa covered her mouth. Tears flooded instantly. For a moment, time folded in on itself. She wasn't 30 years old anymore. She was 6, sitting beside him in that smoky studio, clutching her stuffed bear, watching him smile. The tape played all the way through. 3 minutes and 22 seconds of love captured in air. When it ended, the room was silent except for the sound of Lisa crying softly. She whispered, "He sounded happy." Marion lowered her eyes. He was. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She sat in her kitchen, lights dim, that tape echoing in her head. She thought about how the world had known her father as a legend, an icon, a symbol. But this was just Daddy. The man who carried her to bed after late sessions. The man who called her Peanut. The man who never stopped chasing peace in a world that demanded noise. Weeks later, during a Graceland fundraiser, Lisa quietly donated to a children's music therapy program. No speech, no fanfare, just a small note attached. For the ones who still hear their parents in songs. The donation grew into something bigger, the 1142 Project, named after the exact time that tape began rolling. Kids who had lost parents were given free instruments and music lessons. The project's first class met inside the same studio where it all began. On the wall hung a small bronze plaque, dedicated to the moment music became love. Fans never got to hear the full duet. Only fragments surfaced years later on a tribute compilation, uncredited but unmistakable. A faint child's hum at the edge of a gospel track. A moment almost erased, now eternal. People still talk about it online. Some say they can feel Elvis smiling in that recording. Others swear Lisa's voice still sounds 6 years old, untouched by time. One night, a janitor locking up the Graceland studio heard a faint sound, like static, then a few piano notes. He turned off the lights, stopped, and smiled. Maybe it was feedback. Maybe it was something else. Love leaves echoes. A year later, the 1142 Project held its first concert. Dozens of kids sang together on stage. As the final song ended, Lisa stood backstage, eyes glistening. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel haunted by her father's voice. She felt held by it. The audience rose in a quiet ovation. No shouting, no flashbulbs, just reverence. The kind her father always wanted. What if the most powerful music isn't the kind that fills stadiums, but the kind that fills silence with memory? The studio is quiet now. No lights, no engineers, no real spinning behind glass. Only dust motes drifting through a single sunbeam that cuts across the piano where it all happened. The plaque on the wall reads, March 12, 1976, RCA Studio C. The 1142 recording. Every year, visitors step inside this room and whisper without knowing why. Maybe they feel something left behind. A faint vibration in the air, like the memory of a song that refuses to fade. People still argue about what really happened that night. Was the tape edited? Did Lisa truly sing beside her father? The truth doesn't live in rumors. It lives on the real. And if you listen closely, you can hear more than notes. You can hear love trying to stay. For Elvis, that recording wasn't a product. It wasn't a headline or a paycheck. It was a heartbeat he wanted to keep alive in sound. 3 minutes of honesty in a life built on spectacle. 3 minutes where he stopped being the king and became just a dad singing beside his little girl. Maybe that's why the tape refused to die. Felton once said in an interview before he passed, he wanted the world to know him through his voice, but maybe that night, he finally knew himself. That line ended up engraved beneath the studio plaque. Visitors still stop to read it, tracing the letters with their fingers. Lisa visits quietly once a year. She doesn't stay long. She just stands by the piano, lays a small pink flower on the keys, and whispers something no one else can hear. Then she leaves through the side door. Every time, someone swears they see her smile as she goes. The recording has never been officially released. It isn't listed in catalogs or box sets, but sometimes at fan gatherings, a faint copy plays through an old bootleg speaker. People fall silent when it starts. And when it ends, no one claps. They just breathe. Because deep down, they know what makes a legend isn't the fame or the money or the gold records. It's the pieces of truth that survive long after we're gone. A child's voice, a father's laugh, a moment too small for history, yet too big for time to erase. So the real stays locked away, but the story lives everywhere. In whispers, in memories, in the pause between two notes where love still waits. Perfection fades, but honesty echoes forever. That's what stayed on the tape. If the story touched you, share it with someone who still believes in quiet moments. Because legends aren't made on stages, They're made in rooms like this, between a father and his child, when no one's watching. Some say the real magic of music isn't in what we hear, but in what it makes us remember. And if you listen closely to that old recording, somewhere beneath the hiss and crackle, you might still hear it. A small voice singing beside a man who once carried the world. That's not just music. That's love caught on tape.